The world is silent at 3 a.m. Even the grainy string of oldies coming through the only radio station isn't enough to fill the void. Darkness sucks at the dented sides of the old silver Honda, luring it to the sides of the road where it's sure to be either met with a ditch or a guardrail. Jason's tired, really tired. A crunched-up Red Bull can rests in the passenger seat next to a box of old fries and a Tupperware container of salad he'd never meant to eat. The Red Bull was enough to make him stop swerving, but his lids still feel heavy. He blames 12-hour shifts, nearly hour-long commutes, the government, and God. He blames his wife, too, and their 5-year-old son. But he also blames himself. He's just tired. There's one stoplight in between the edge of his town and his house. It looks red from a distance. He's expecting for it to change by the time he reaches it so he can just cruise right on through. The wind knocks it around a little, making it sway on the sagging line, but it never switches. Weird. He comes to a full stop anyway. He considers running it, but with his luck he'll get T-boned by some drunk redneck driving his dad's F-150. The light continues to sway. He doesn't remember the wind being that strong when he got into the car earlier, but it could have picked up. He watches it with a small degree of impatience, drumming his fingers on the broken skin of his steering wheel. He just wants to get home. It's only 20 more minutes from here. The red light flickers. Jason rubs at his eyes, convinced they're going on him, until it flickers again. The street lamps on either side dim and the traffic light goes out entirely. Nothing now but 3 cold gray eyes staring him down in the darkness, daring him to make a move. Jason hesitates. He looks to either side, wondering if he should just go for it. No one is coming. He doesn't really have a choice, does he? Before he can commit, the light flips back on. This time it's a bright, oversaturated green. It looks a little too bright, like whoever brought it back to life cranked up the juice a little too high. Jason doesn't really give it a second thought and hits the gas pedal. He's just ready to be home. 10 minutes in and the cop car comes out of nowhere. Its lights are flashing from the roof, but there's no sound, not a single siren. He pulls over to the side of the road anyway, swearing under his breath, popping open his glove compartment to fish for his registration. He reaches out to kill the radio, but it's already off. He pushes the knob once just to be sure. Total silence. A dead radio is all he needs. He pushes that to the back of his mind to deal with later. In his rearview mirror he can see the cop coming. The man is walking like he has a stiff leg, almost limping towards the car. Jason rolls down his window just enough so that he can communicate and pass the documents through, but not any lower. The cop stops by his door, lifting a heavy flashlight and shining it inside the car. The beam hits Jason in the face and he grimaces, lifting one hand to shade his eyes. The bright light doesn't waver and he can barely see the cop around it. The officer is pale and bald, his head perfectly smooth like an egg. His eyes, probably thanks to the light, are just 2 dark pits in his skull. His mouth moves, but his words sound off, as if they're slightly out of sync with the rest of him. His lips look like they're just a dark smear across his face, curled back like he's holding something behind them. Again, that's probably thanks to the light. "Pretty late to be driving around." The officer's voice is high and genderless. For some reason, it makes the hairs on the back of Jason's neck stiff. "Yeah," Jason agrees. "I worked a 12-hour shift today back in Gaston, but I'm almost home. I live just up the road." The cop just stares at him. The white light is making Jason's eyes water and he tries not to look away. The last thing he wants is trouble. He thinks he can see the officer smile, but it's more like a wider black line across his face, getting wider and wider. At some point it reaches the corners of his ears and it looks like the top of his head might tip back. "I'm sorry, officer." Jason hates how thin and stressed his own voice sounds. "Is there a reason you pulled me over, or—" "I didn't pull you over," the cop says. "You came to a stop." He knocks his knuckles against the window and Jason jumps, his heart slamming into his ribcage as he swallows and accepts that with a nod. The cop snickers and pulls back. He pulls the flashlight away, and Jason is left with bright white and red spots swimming in front of his vision.
Have a good night.
Jason barely registers what the cop has to say.
Stay safe.
When his eyes can focus again, Jason sees the officer retreating back to his car. He's still limping, and the streetlights make the top of his bald egg head shine. Jason swallows hard again, rolls his window back all the way up. He jams his fingers against the knob of his radio, hoping for anything, even the Beatles, so long as they're distracting. Nothing. He swears and turns his focus towards getting back on the road. 10 minutes from home. 10 minutes from home. There are never cops around this road. 8 minutes from home. He's never been stopped before in his life. 5 minutes from home. There's an awful lot of trees. Weren't they developing this area for a new subdivision? He pulls into his driveway, letting out a sigh of relief that he didn't know he was holding in. His hands are shaking as he turns off the car and gets out, abandoning everything he brought with him to work the afternoon before and deciding he'll get it in the morning. It's only 3 short brick steps up to his front door. It's locked when he gets there. Strange, because Sarah usually leaves it unlocked when she's expecting him home. Maybe she wasn't feeling safe and decided to lock it. After the night he's had, he doesn't blame her. He pulls out his keys and unlocks the door, stepping inside and closing it softly behind him. It's not much, their little house, but it's home. He instantly feels better simply crossing the threshold. Jason sheds his jacket and tosses it onto the big ugly armchair that sits in front of the TV. He keeps going, kicking off his shoes once he gets to the kitchen. He doesn't even want a shower, he just wants to collapse into bed. Still, he moves as quietly as he can. He doesn't want to wake up Sarah, and he absolutely doesn't want to wake up Abel. The last thing he is capable of at this moment is lulling a disgruntled 5-year-old back to sleep. The stairs creak as he makes his way up. Jason starts unbuttoning his work shirt, sliding it over his head and crumpling it up in his hands. He reaches his room. The door is cracked shut. Odd. Again, Sarah usually sleeps with the door open so he doesn't make any noise at all coming in. Jason places his hand against the wood and the door creaks open. He slips inside, his feet making no sound against the soft carpet. He drops his work shirt into the laundry basket and then starts taking off his pants, glancing over at the bed to see his beautiful wife with her long red curls strewn over her satin pillow. She looks so peaceful, so beautiful. His eyes follow the line of her arm from the elbow to her delicate fingers, only to double back. Her arm's thrown over someone else. There's another head of hair, straight and ash blonde, on the pillow next to hers. At first he doesn't believe it. Another man in his bed, his wife, his home? Jason walks around the side just to be sure, grabbing the comforter and pulling it all the way down. Sarah's knees jerk and she curls up with a rush of air, naked except for a t-shirt that's a few sizes too big for her. The man beside her doesn't move at all. Jason can feel the blood pooling in his face. He wants to shout, to grab them, to haul them out of bed and beat them to death with whatever he can get his hands on. He opens his mouth and a wordless cry comes out. He turns around and sweeps his arm across the top of the dresser. Sarah's perfume bottles, her serums, and her moisturizers go flying off and thump against the carpet where they land. Jason brings both of his fists down against the hard wooden surface and then kicks the drawers. They shudder with the force. Sarah sits upright in bed, her massive curls falling down over her shoulders. She pushes them out of her face and then leans over, grabbing the arm of the man beside her and shaking him awake.
Jason,
she whispers.
Did you hear that?
Jason looks up with a heavy vein pounding in his forehead. Is she really asking him that right now? He starts to say something, but he's cut off by the voice that responds first, sounding a little too close to his own. Hear what?
I think someone's in the room.
Sarah sits up and leans over, flicking on the lamp that sits on the bedside table. Yellow light floods the little room and the man beside her sits up. It's like looking in a goddamn mirror. Jason feels his heart sink. The man in bed looks almost exactly like him. Almost because of the fact that he seems to be the better version. If someone were to ask Jason, what do you wish you'd look like? His answer would have been, that. I didn't hear anything, the new man says. He sits up in bed and looks around, looking right through Jason and glancing at the products on the floor. "Your jars rolled off the dresser."
God damn it.
Sarah gets out of bed and moves to pick up what's on the floor. Jason looks at her and then looks at the man on the bed, completely floored by the way they're both so successfully pretending he doesn't exist. Hello?" Jason gets down in front of Sarah, waving a hand in front of her face. "We need to talk here. What the fucking hell do you think you're doing?" She ignores him. She picks up a few little jars and sets them on the dresser. The new man just settles back in bed and rolls over to go back to sleep. "Is this some kind of joke?" He has to be going crazy. Maybe he fell asleep on the way home and crashed his car after all. Maybe this is all some sort of dream in a ditch while he's waiting to be rescued. "Sarah, why won't you fucking talk to me?" She stands up, putting the last of her bottles on the dresser. He stands as well, reaching out and grabbing her shoulder. Sarah jumps, yelping, and turns towards the bed with wide eyes.
Jason,
She touches her arm.
was that you?
"What?" the new man mutters. Jason grinds his teeth. "Talk to me!" He reaches out to grab her again, but she's already out of reach, going back over to the bed. She's still rubbing her shoulder.
That's not funny.
She snaps, grabbing her covers and sinking back down against her pillow. "I'm not trying to be," the new guy mutters, half of his words lost to sleep. Jason balls up his fists at his sides. It takes every bit of restraint he has not to wail against the man's back until he turns around and starts giving some answers. Sarah isn't talking to him, and she's acting like she can't even see him. Am I invisible? Jason goes back to the door. "She doesn't want me to be here? Fine, I won't be." He could swing the door open, let it bang against the wall, and start stomping down the stairs. He thinks better of it, only because he doesn't want to wake up his little man. For a brief second, he feels a pang. He doesn't know what he's going to do about Abel. But waking up a toddler in the middle of the night and hustling them out to the car, especially when he isn't even sure where he's going to go, isn't the way. He sails down the staircase and makes his way to the front door. He isn't even wearing shoes. Jason grabs the handle and gives it a sharp turn. It's stuck. Awesome. He probably locked it and now he isn't thinking. He unlocks both the knob and the deadbolt and tries again. Still stuck. He frowns. Jason pulls on the knob and the door rattles in its frame, but nothing more happens. He can't get the damn thing open. Swearing, he turns around to walk back across the house and try the back door. Again, same deal. The handle won't budge. Wind knocks the loose screen door against the frame, mocking him. He abandons that idea and moves on to the next as he tries to ignore the panic rising in his chest. He tries all the windows in the living room. Locked. The window in the garage has always been painted shut, but he still runs out to try it. The garage door won't even lift up, either manually or with the button. He goes back inside and tries the little window against the kitchen sink. It's not even big enough for him to squeeze through, and it doesn't matter. It's stuck as well. What is going on? His throat feels dry and swollen. He feels like he's screaming into the void. He half expects that man in his bed to come downstairs swinging a golf club. He has vivid visions of his blood and brains splattering all over the wall. He paces around the kitchen, kicking one of his shoes across the room. It slams into the oven and then falls hopelessly to the floor. What is he supposed to do now? He can't leave. The people upstairs, his own wife, are refusing to acknowledge his existence. He isn't even sure if he can hear his own voice anymore. The silence in the house swallows every word and every cry. Their microwave says it's almost 5 in the morning, and it won't be much longer before dawn's peeking through the curtains. He's still tired, exhausted, and he wants to lay down. He feels he has to. It isn't like there's anything else he can do. Jason walks back through the living room and sits down heavily on the couch, rubbing his face and grinding the peels of his hands into his eyes. He can hear movement upstairs. Maybe they're waking up? If they are, they'll have to kill him in his sleep. Jason drops his head down to the arm of the couch and falls asleep so quickly that he isn't even sure he closed his eyes.
Abel,
Sarah's voice comes from the kitchen.
don't leave your shoes on the kitchen floor.
Jason twitches. He doesn't know how long he's been asleep. He tries to lift his head, but his neck won't budge. His legs won't move either. He's tried that. Jason closes his eyes, taking a deep breath. He's familiar with sleep paralysis, and he knows it will pass, but it's hard to shake the idea that he feels like he's dead. He tries to get past the fuzzy panic in his brain and assess himself for damage, any sharp pain or any feeling of lying in his own blood. His entire body aches like it's been run over by a car. After waiting for what feels like an eternity, he tries to move again. Nothing budges.
Abel!
Sarah calls up the stairs. He can hear her moving, but he can't turn his head to see her. He doesn't even know if she's noticed him on the couch.
Are you listening to me?
They're not my shoes, Mom.
The voice coming down the stairs shocks him. It's deep, rough, and untuned. Absolutely the voice of a young man going through puberty. It doesn't make any sense that a toddler...
Well, they're not your dad's.
Sarah said.
Come pick them up and put them away. I'm trying to mop.
Heavy footsteps. Jason feels his heart pounding with each one. He desperately wants to look up and crane his neck to catch a glimpse, but he can't even do that.
They're too small.
Abel points out.
I don't care.
Sarah tells him.
Pick them up.
The teenage boy huffs. Jason can hear him open the garage and presumably toss the shoes out there. Every part of him wants to bolt, and that just makes his muscles scream.
I'm going out with Mark later,
the boy says. Sarah makes a little disapproving sound.
You think you're leaving the house after getting suspended for 3 days?
We both know that if I stay here, I'm just going to drive you crazy.
Abel starts walking towards the living room. He pauses in the doorway, and Jason waits, holding his breath.
Mom?
The boy hesitates.
What?
The sound of water hitting the plastic bottom of a bucket.
Nothing.
Abel shakes his head. He walks over to the armchair in the middle of the room and picks up the jacket, tossing it onto the couch. He settles down and kicks his feet up, picking up the remote and flipping on the TV. He doesn't act like he sees Jason at all. He's turned away enough that Jason can't get a good look at his face, except for the prominent nose and the long black hair which he keeps swept across his oily face. God, puberty, all right. He has a hard time believing that this could be his sweet, plump-cheeked little boy. What the hell is going on? The TV just becomes background noise as Jason tries to focus on getting himself moving again. He tries to move his foot down. He tries to wiggle his fingers. He tries to open his mouth, turn his neck. Nothing. An hour, 2 hours. He gives up. He closes his eyes again and tries to see if sleep will take him back. The afternoon shadows are long in the living room when he opens his eyes. He can open his mouth now. That gives him hope. He isn't so sure he can use his voice. His nostrils flare as he takes in another deep breath and he tries to assess whether there's anything else he can move. Nothing else. Now his legs feel numb, pins and needles pricking at his soles. He whimpers, a soft sound that only he can really hear. The garage door slams shut.
Mom?
Abel sounds like he's screaming at the top of his lungs.
Where are my car keys?
Your father has them.
Sarah responds, calm against the storm.
Why the hell would he take them to work?
Because the front door was unlocked this morning when he left, and you know you were not supposed to be out driving at night.
I wasn't out.
Tell that to him when he gets home.
Heavy footsteps in the kitchen. The fridge door opening and slamming shut. Sarah passes through the living room. Jason feels her hand brushing against the back of the couch. He can't even look up at her as she pauses and says,
Get your jacket up off the couch. Don't just leave things laying around.
It's not mine.
Abel pops the tab on a soda can and it fizzes.
You know, maybe you would have your car if you quit lying to me.
She said, smoothly, not missing a beat.
Pick up your crap.
She keeps moving. Abel lingers in the kitchen before walking back towards the living room, making a sound in his throat as he bends down to pick up the navy and white hoodie. It's his chance. He isn't sure what for. There's a pressure in his chest like someone's sitting on it. He breathes in deep through his nostrils and parts his dry lips, his voice coming out as something close to a wheeze. Abel! The boy freezes. Jason feels a flutter of hope. He tries again, his voice coming out a little stronger but still hard-won. Abel! The boy looks down. His eyes pass right through Jason and his heart sinks. Of course Abel can't see him, but he hears him. That's something. Abel doesn't move. For a second he just stands there gripping the hoodie until his knuckles turn white. Then, without a word, he turns tail and runs up the stairs. Jason stares at the wall in defeat. Where he is, stretched out on the couch, he can't help but see shadows from the corner of his eyes. He feels like something's watching him, standing over him, and he knows that he cannot move out of the way or defend himself. If something were to just reach over the back of the couch, it could touch him, turn his head and smile at him, and he would not be able to do anything. He swears he can feel something touching his head, or sometimes maybe he can feel breath against his ear. He tries not to think about it, which is all he can do. He's in so much pain, now that he feels like he's burning. It feels like there's a fire underneath the couch and he's being cooked alive. The pain in his legs goes from numb to cold burning to numb again. It's harder and harder to breathe, like whatever's sitting on his chest is getting heavier and heavier. The day stretches on, his wife and grown child buzzing around his head. The man comes home, his imposter, sending chills down Jason's spine and making his stomach clench. It's sickening to hear Sarah greet him so happily. He tries not to listen to them talk about his day, about how much of a pain Abel's been to deal with. He shifts his focus to his own stomach, which feels like he's been punched in the gut. His mouth and throat are so dry that even when he licks his lips, his tongue feels gummy. He can smell food from the kitchen and it makes him salivate. He drools from the corner of his mouth and isn't able to do anything about it. He closes his eyes and tries not to think about it, tries to let sleep pull him back under. He's in too much pain and he cannot breathe. He tries to think of other ways to get Abel's attention. It's 3 a.m. That's what the clock on the mantelpiece says, and it's let out a dulcet chime that makes Jason's head pound. His stomach's cramping worse than before. Jason moans, trying to shift before realizing he can't, and being reminded of that fact by the way his shoulders and neck scream at him. The pain is enough to make panic rise in his chest, and he gulps down a few breaths to try and settle it. He has to take a piss. He realizes that's what the cramping is. He probably has to take a shit too, and part of him thinks he should, just to spite Sarah and everything else going on in the house. The stairs creak. Jason licks his lips and opens his mouth just a little, another trembling, wheezing attempt at talking.
Abel.
The creaking comes to a halt. He tries it again, desperate.
Abel.
The boy turns tail and runs back up the stairs. Jason groans. The days start to run together. Sarah puts up new curtains, darker than the ones before, and they block out any sunlight that might think to stream through the panels. Open windows in the kitchen allow in crisp fall air. Sarah walks in what seems like every few hours, spraying a can of Febreze or lighting a new designer candle.
It smells like absolute shit in here,
she keeps saying. Abel doesn't like to walk through the living room anymore, but he seems more comfortable if she's there. He sits down in the chair and keeps glancing over his shoulder, like something's going to come out of the shadows and grab him.
I can't smell anything,
he says.
You never can. Your room is a testimony to that.
She sets a heavy 4-wick candle on the shelf.
Weren't you gonna clean that, by the way?
Abel shrugs. He turns on the TV as she walks out of the room. Jason can feel every nerve twitching in his fingers, but he still can't move them.
Abel.
He manages to speak a little and then guns for more. Abel jumps and turns up the television.
I need to get out.
He's out of breath. Abel glances over his shoulder again, but seems like he's too afraid to get out of the chair and run.
I can't hear you.
Abel says, almost too quietly to be heard.
I can't hear you and you don't scare me.
He turns the TV up louder still. Jason feels like his frustration's going to rip open his chest.
I need to get out!
The last words come out louder than he intended or thought was possible. It's a deep growl that tears across the room. Abel shrieks and slams his back against the chair. It rocks back onto 2 legs and then topples onto the ground. He tumbles to the ground with it, scrambling to his feet, and Sarah comes running in.
Abel?
She asks.
Are you alright? What happened?
I'm fine.
The teenage boy says, his chest heaving as he stares at the couch. He's still looking right through Jason, but his eyes are in the right place at least. Sarah moves to set the chair back up.
You scared me to death.
She says.
Stop goofing around.
Sorry.
Abel mutters. He leaves the room without even turning off the television. Jason is barely conscious when he opens his eyes, peering at Abel through the slits. He almost chokes on his own spit when he sees the boy sitting in front of him. Abel can't see him, clearly, but he has a pad of paper resting in his lap and a pen.
Okay.
He nudges a burning white tea light he has set on the floor by his foot.
I was reading about this.
He clicks his pen.
They say to try automatic writing when spirits won't shut up and leave you alone, so I'm here. I'm listening.
Jason wants to laugh, but he can't even do that. He feels so much weaker than he did before, and even with Abel sitting so close to him, he isn't sure he can be heard. A few moments of silence sit between them as he tries to remember how to speak properly, his words eking out slowly between his dry lips.
Not belong here.
He finally manages. Abel scribbles on the paper.
Not belong here. Who doesn't belong here?
Trapped in the house.
You're trapped in here?
Abel's hands are shaking visibly, but he keeps writing.
What do you need? How can you be free?
What a question. He doesn't know. Jason thinks about it for a little longer before...
Can't move.
You can't.
Abel furrows his brow.
You can't move on. Shit.
He rubs at his face.
Okay, fuck.
Abel.
Jason wishes he had a little momentum, anything at all, to propel his body closer so he can speak to his grown version of his son as intimately as possible.
Not your dad.
He can see the goosebumps rise on Abel's arm. The boy stands up, holding the pad and paper still.
Not my dad.
Not your dad.
That growl escapes from him again, desperate and hoarse. Abel stomps on the tea light, crushing the whole thing, and then runs out of the room again. He sprints up the stairs so quickly they barely creak. Jason sighs, breath rattling past his lips. Pisses his pants again. He doesn't care. 60 clock chimes later, not counting the half-hour songs, the upstairs bathroom floods. Jason doesn't know anything about it. All he knows is the water spot it creates on the ceiling, which starts to look like a face. It has wide eyes and a wide mouth, just like the cop. He can only barely start to see it in his peripherals. It drips water down onto his cheek, which flows into his mouth, and he cries. He's only able to shed one tear. He keeps his mouth open all night, his tongue working to catch any stray streams and droplets. It slows eventually, and then the plumber comes and it stops altogether. A few more chimes go by. Abel comes back into the living room with the same paper pad. He sits down in front of the couch with no candle this time, only the occasional light from his phone.
So, last time you said he wasn't my real dad. I want you to tell me who is.
Jason makes a helpless sound in his throat.
Me.
Fuck.
Abel drops his pen. The stairs creak and Sarah's voice can be heard.
Abel,
She asks.
what are you doing up this late?
Nothing.
He stands. She walks into the living room area, the first time Jason's really seen her in days, and there's something cold and beautiful about her now. She holds out her hand for the paper pad and Abel hesitates, eventually passing it over to her. She glances at what he's been writing, furrowing her brow.
Abel, what is this?
She asks.
He
tries to explain. She flips over the top page to look at more.
What are you doing?
She grips the notebook and wields it like a weapon.
I heard a voice.
Abel finally summons the courage to say.
And I read somewhere that you can talk to spirits.
He gestures mutely, the rest of his explanation failing him.
I just wanted to know what I heard.
There are no spirits in this house.
In a flash of temper, she smacks his arm with the notepad.
No ghosts, no nothing. That isn't real. I don't want you dabbling in this crap.
She rips the pages out and crumples them in her fist.
If it isn't real, why does it bother you?
He asks sarcastically. That earns him another smack. This time she hits him across the face.
Because demons are real, and this is a Christian house. What has it been saying to you? What do you think you've been hearing?
Nothing.
He turns his head.
Only my name.
He moves past her.
I'm going to bed.
Stay up there all day tomorrow.
She says.
You are not coming down for anything.
Steps. Abel is gone. Jason watches as she uncrumples the paper and smooths it out enough to read what was written. Her face goes white and she crunches it up again, stuffing it down into one of the corners of the couch before going back upstairs. There's something about the living room. Now no one wants to go in, even to watch TV, unless they're all together. Sarah doesn't even light a candle. Jason can smell his own shit now and more. It's starting to get to him. Abel returns a few nights later, this time kneeling in front of the couch and holding a birthday candle. He doesn't have a pad of paper with him.
I don't think you're a demon. I think you're lost. Just tell me how I can help you.
Jason opens his mouth to speak, but before he can get a word out, he hears the stairs creak. He knows Sarah's coming. His gut tells him that.
Get out!
He wheezes.
Get out! Get out!
Abel is so startled by the sudden change in voice that he drops the birthday candle. He swears, trying to pick it up, but his fingers catch on the flames and he recoils. The carpet starts to smoke and he scrambles backward to grab a pillow from the chair. He starts smacking at the candle, trying to put it out. The flames catch on the carpet and leap up, several inches tall, flickering, spreading quickly. He keeps hitting the flames with the pillow.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
Sarah screams. Water runs from the kitchen tap and she almost trips over herself, bringing it into the living room. She stops at the back of the couch and tosses the water on the flames. They quench immediately. She refills her glass and throws down another stream of water just to be sure. Abel smacks the wet, charred carpet with the pillow. His face is white.
Are you trying to burn the house down?
Sarah shrieks. She rips the pillow from his hands and smacks him in the head with it. Abel ducks, still not enough to avoid, and lifts his arms to put off her blows.
No, I was just...
Talking to demons again? Light and fire is acting like the goddamn son of Satan.
She takes a ragged breath.
Not in my house! Not in my house!
She hits him again with the pillow. Abel tries to get to his feet, but she grabs his ankle, pulling his leg out from under him. His head hits the floor and he groans.
We are gonna pray. We are gonna pray right now.
No.
Abel puts a hand to his head.
Please, can I go to bed?
Get on your knees.
She doesn't leave any room for argument. Abel obediently sits up on his knees. She grabs his hands and forces them together in front of him, holding them between her own. She kneels, with her forehead pressed to his, her breath shaky, and she begins to recite the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You aren't saying it, say it. Do you remember how? God, do you remember how?
I remember.
Abel sucks in a deep breath.
Our Father, who art in heaven.
Our Father.
She starts sobbing. Jason's never seen her like this, not in all the time he's been married to her. She's crying so hard she's given herself a nosebleed. She drags her hand across her face and smears her blood across Abel's forehead, pressing her thumb against his skull and reciting the prayer louder, squeezing his hands into hers. Finally, she releases him, pushing him back so that he falls against the floor. She stands up, blood running down from her nose and dripping off her chin.
In the name of the Father, you will not bring demons into this house, and I will not have you be deceived by them.
She takes hold of his ankles again. Abel kicks and tries to roll over onto his stomach, but she has a surprisingly strong grip. She drags him a few inches, and then grabs the chair pillow he had been using. She shoves it down over his face and puts her whole weight on top of it, her eyes boring straight ahead. Abel thrashes, his hands coming up to claw at her back, trying to pull her down and away from him. It doesn't do any good. Her faith gives her preternatural strength. His hands finally fall down to his sides, smacking against the carpet. She waits for a beat and then pulls the pillow away, leaning over to examine whether he's still breathing. Jason can't tell if he is. He feels like he's going to throw up. The only reason he keeps it down is because he doesn't want to choke on his own vomit. Sarah walks away, smearing her blood onto the arm of the couch. The clock on the mantel chimes. Jason can only watch Abel's body, watching his chest and trying to decide whether it's an illusion that he can see it rise and fall. He waits for any sign of life, any little twitch. He eventually sees it, a real breath, then it soothes him only a little. Another chime. Sarah returns with some bungee cords from the garage. She ties up Abel's hands and feels and checks his breathing again. She then goes back into the kitchen and starts making breakfast. Jason hears him, the imposter, coming down the stairs, and they exchange words. Jason doesn't know how much the imposter knows. He doesn't know exactly how Sarah made him aware of the situation. The imposter leaves. Dishes clang as Sarah clears the table and puts them away. Abel has started to stir, his eyes flickering open. He wiggles a bit and figures out he can't move. Jason feels a strange kinship with him in that moment, a desperate thread of connection. Except Jason's monsters, up until this point, have been largely imagined. Abel is standing just a few feet away. Sarah returns to the living room. She makes sure the drapes are pulled close as tightly as possible before walking back to Abel. She straddles his legs and sits down on his knees, taking his bound hands in hers. She cradles them as she strokes the back of his hand with her thumb.
You know,
She says,
God gave us the gift of language. He gave us the gift of writing.
Abel swallows hard and nods. She continues stroking his hands.
And those who abuse the Lord's gifts may as well not have them at all.
She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a slim red lighter. Abel's eyes widen and he tries to pull away, but she's sitting on his legs. She grips his hand tighter and sparks the flame, peeling his fingers up and holding the lighter just underneath. The skin starts to get red. Abel lets out a harsh cry. She hisses and drives the flames closer so that it splits around his finger, lapping at both sides. The skin darkens and Jason can smell it burning. Abel screaming now, trying to thrash and kick. He doesn't have much room to do anything. When one fingertip is blackened, she moves on to the next. She pulls the flame down the line of his fingers. Abel screams until he's hoarse. At some point, the lighter gets too hot for her to hold. She jams the hot metal against his uncharred fingertips and then drops it to the floor. She tries to break his fingers in her own hands. When that doesn't work, she releases him and then sits back on his knees. Sweat is dripping down his temples, soaking his hair. She looks around for a moment, staring at the clock on the mantel before she stands.
I will be back.
She says.
Wait, no, Mom, no, please.
Abel chokes, and he coughs out the last syllable. Sarah's already gone. Not a full chime, but an interlude of pleasant little bells to signify the passing of half an hour sounds off. Sarah returns with a roll of duct tape and a basin. She sets the roll down and takes the basin to the kitchen. Jason can hear it filling up with water, and it isn't long before she brings it back into the living room. She sets it down and grabs the duct tape. She peels off a piece and slams it down across Abel's mouth. She then takes a much longer piece and wraps it around his mouth and head at least twice before cutting it loose. She then grabs his shoulder and pulls him over onto his stomach. She takes the basin and drags it towards them.
I don't want to do this.
She says, her voice is quivering a little as if she's on the verge of tears.
But the demon will not leave you unless it feels like its own life is in danger.
She grabs Abel by the long black hair and shoves his face into the basin. Bubbles rise instantly to the surface, indicative that he was able to exhale through his nose. She closes her eyes and starts counting, putting all her weight onto her arm pressed against the back of his head. She holds him down there for... Jason lost count way too long. She pulls Abel's head back, and he struggles to catch a clear breath through his nose. She only gives him a few seconds to do it before dunking his head back into the basin. More bubbles, not as many as last time. She lifts his head again, and then dunks him back down. Again, and again, and again. When she decides that she's done, she drops him back down onto the carpet. Abel's body is trembling violently, but he's still bound and there's nothing he can do. Jason wants desperately to move, to help. If he could only move himself away from the couch, he would bash her skull in, he would do it. Her brains would be all over the wall. Sarah leaves again. She leaves the basin behind. Abel stays on his side, taking deep breaths. Each one is that much harder won because of the tape covering his mouth. A few more chimes go by. Jason finds himself just staring at Abel, staring at him and trying to ignore the shadows creeping in on the edges of his vision. Sarah returns. Her face looks like it's swollen from crying and red from a vigorous washing. She grabs hold of Abel's shoulder and turns him back over onto his stomach. She pulls up the back of his shirt, noting the clean landscape of his back. She sits back down on his legs and pulls out what looks like a metal meat skewer. She grabs her lighter again, heating up the pointed end. Horror squeezes Jason's stomach as she puts the heated tip to Abel's skin and he screams into the tape. God, she talks, and she writes with her tool, forgives me. She sets the skewer down. Blood is streaming down Abel's sides and soaking the carpet beneath. She leaves his shirt up and picks up the roll of duct tape. She peels off a length and twists it around, making what's almost a cord. She tears it off and then wraps the cord around Abel's neck, pulling it tight.
Do you believe it?
She asks. Abel whimpers and she pulls the cord tighter.
Do you believe that God can forgive you?
Abel nods, choking, groaning into his gag, trying to buck her off. She bows his head back even further. The duct tape cord looks like it's going to slice right through his neck.
God forgives, he always forgives. Leave, demon! Leave my son, leave him be! Get behind thee, Satan! You have no power here!
She releases the cord. Abel's head hits the ground, his whole body's limp, and Jason knows immediately that he's dead. Pins and needles. His body's filled with them. It's like having 1,000 fire ants crawling underneath his skin and biting. Sarah sits back, taking a moment or two to breathe before reaching over and touching Abel's shoulder. He doesn't respond.
Abel?
She gets closer. She pulls him into her lap and holds his face in her hands.
Abel?
Her voice climbs, getting more desperate. Like something came to her all of a sudden, a realization or a glimmer of her sanity. She wraps her arms around him and clutches him close to her chest, rocking back and forth as she holds him. The scream that rips free from her throat makes Jason's blood run cold. His head is spinning. He cannot process what's happened right in front of him. She's screaming. She isn't even sobbing. She's just screaming wordlessly into the void. The front door opens. As soon as Sarah hears it, she stops. She doesn't even wipe away the tears running down her face. She pushes Abel's body away from her and stands. She walks back towards the front door, greeting the imposter as if nothing out of the ordinary had just occurred. Jason has to close his eyes to keep from throwing up.
You killed him,
The imposter says flatly. His voice startles Jason, making his heart skip a beat.
You told me you were going to help him.
I tried.
She tries to defend herself.
The devil's hold on him was just too strong.
Devil be damned.
The imposter turns around and walks back towards the kitchen. Sarah follows. Jason can hear them retreating, and Abel's body still on the floor, closer to him now than it had been. He can smell blood and charred flesh.
Do you know what a perfect devil is, Sarah?
The imposter asks.
It's a woman who kills her own child. That is a sin that can never be forgiven. Sit.
Her ass hits a chair. Jason hears it scuff across the floor.
Now you are going to do what is right, and you're going to do it properly for Abel.
A pill shaking in a bottle. Sarah isn't saying anything. The clock on the mantel does not chime. It does not sing. It makes a horrible clunking noise like it's been shot with a bullet and topples from his perch. The clock on the mantel does not chime. It does not sing. It makes a horrible clunking noise like it has been shot with a bullet and topples from its perch. As soon as it lands, Jason's legs start to feel like they're burning. All of a sudden, he can stretch them again. Amazed, he flexes his fingers. He can move his arms, he can move his head, he can move. Jason sits up. His head spins and he almost falls off the couch. He grips onto the back of it, looking towards the kitchen. Sarah's sitting at the round little kitchen table, a prescription bottle of pills to her right and a pint glass filled with some kind of dark liquid, maybe whiskey, to her left. The imposter standing right beside her, one hand resting on her back, as she takes a handful of pills and then a hard swallow of whiskey. More pills, whiskey, more pills, whiskey, more pills. Her head lulls. The imposter nudges her gently onto the back of her curly-haired skull and her whole body slumps forward. Her forehead hits the table and makes the same horrible clunking sound as the clock. The imposter looks up. He doesn't look very much like Jason anymore. His eyes are black pits in his head. His face is shiny and pale without lines. He looks straight at Jason. 2 spots of white light buried deep in the pits of his sockets look like they're boring straight into Jason's skull. The imposter's gray smile stretches across his face and his tongue snakes out, black and blue and long enough to stretch down to his navel. A high-pitched ringing stabs Jason in the ears. He screams and his hands fly up to cover them, but he can't tear his eyes away from the creature standing in the kitchen. The ringing is accompanied by white noise, which fades into something else. It's a sound he can barely make out at first. As it gets louder, it sounds like his voice weeping, distorted, ugly, and grainy from a bad phone line.
She's dead. She's dead. She's
dead, and he's dead, and she killed them both. The devil made her do it. The devil made her do it. I swear I killed them both. I swear I did.
That does it for him. It does not matter that his body's so weak. He grabs the back of the couch, and pure adrenaline propels him to jump over it. He runs up the stairs without looking back towards the kitchen. His heart feels like it's going to burst out of his chest. Where's he going to go? Where the fuck is he going to go? He runs into the master bedroom. It's the closest to the top of the stairs. He shuts the door and locks it. He considers dragging a dresser around to block it, but that would take too long. He runs for the closet, which is big enough to walk into. He whips around and pulls the door closed, still gripping the handle tightly as he crumples to his knees. He waits with bated breath, listening for any sign that someone's coming up the stairs, or that someone's trying to get into the room. Nothing. His grip relaxes on the doorknob just a little. He closes his eyes and leans his head against the doorframe. All of the vomit he had been holding back suddenly shoots from his mouth, and he spews it all over his own shoes, or the imposter's shoes. The doorknob turns in his hand. He did not even hear anyone coming up. Fighting the urge to throw up again, Jason throws himself onto his hands and crawls towards the back of the closet. The door opens and a light shines in, white and blinding. He hears someone talking over a radio, and then the person in the doorway responds.
Back up. I think we've got him.
Jason blinks. The light moves away and he can see a police officer, a real police officer, standing in the doorway. At first he feels relief, and it slams into him so fast that he nearly passes out. It's followed quickly by horror. He can't even talk. His voice is still dry, barely scraping out of his throat.
Don't.
The officer steps forward.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say...
He keeps going, but Jason isn't listening. He's barely aware of himself being lifted off the ground and his hands cuffed behind his back. The officer has to drag him out, and another has to help. He cannot walk on his own. All of his ability is gone. They drag him downstairs where more police are spread out over a grisly scene. Sarah is in one of the kitchen chairs, her hands duct taped to her neck, her open mouth full of white foam and colorful pills. Shock makes him cold. He wants to protest. That's not what I saw. The police divert him towards the front door, passing through the living room as they go. A toddler, a 5-year-old boy, has a sheet draped over most of his body, but his little feet are poking out. His legs are covered in bruises. He feels sick. He's going to throw up again. Not Abel, not little Abel. Real Abel, his boy, his baby boy. And Sarah. Oh God, Sarah. The officer pulls him out the front door and the cold autumn wind hits his face. For a brief second, he feels like maybe this is all a bad dream. He can wake up and walk into the house and everything will be normal. They turn him around to get him into the car. He gets one last glimpse of the house. There is a face on the brick. Black eyes and a black smile. And next to it, in hideous red writing, are the words, Universe Red 13.